This project was funded by Southern SARE, and it was primarily focused on nutrient and water management in organic vegetable systems in north central Florida.
We're a diversified, sustainable vegetable farm here in Gainesville, Florida, and we grow on about 15 acres.
So our main project here at Siembra was comparing two different clays. So we added one clay that was coming from on-site, another one that was delivered from a company. We installed soil moisture sensors below the plots that were amended with clay, installed drip irrigation, although we could have used sprinkler as well, but we focused on drip here. Then planted cabbages for 2 years, looked at nutrient cycling, soil health, weeds, nematodes, and economics.
So I was interested in using clay amendments on the farm. In Florida, we have very sandy soil. You know, a couple of the big problems with sandy soil is nutrient retention and moisture retention. We hypothesized that clay would kind of help with both of those issues. It's also super abundant and sustainably, sourced here in Florida. So kind of the combination of all those things just made it seem like a good fit for a sustainable farm. It's very abundant locally, but just finding someone who's willing to load it and haul it and deliver it to your farm, I would say was the biggest challenge. So the way we sourced clay was just working with local construction companies that are excavating the clay, either from retention ponds or construction sites. So they're just generating this clay as a byproduct. It was challenging to know, how good the clay was going to be before sourcing it, but it was basically free. We just paid for the truck to bring it here, so it didn't feel like a big risk. And so determining the quality of the clay basically kind of just involved looking at the clay, feeling the clay, kind of getting a sense of how slippery, soft, and pure it was. We also did a jar test where we'd shake it in a jar and see, what proportions of sand and clay were present in there. The outcomes we were expecting were increased moisture content in the soil, and hopefully that would translate into increased harvest size on the cabbages. And we did observe trends on both of those things. We observed a trend of increased moisture content in the soil and increased head size on the cabbages. One thing that worked out as a farm using organic practices is we have a manure spreader, and that was a pretty crucial implement for getting the clay out. So I'm not sure how many conventional farms would have that technology on hand. And if you had to factor in the investment of getting a manure spreader, how much the equation would change. But because we already had a manure spreader, there was really no investment beyond the small investment in the clay itself. So for spreading the clay, just the weight of the clay, I can get a little more clay into the spreader if I'm adding some compost or some mulch in there, just to kind of help it flow out of the spreader and not bog down the spreader. The top question remaining unanswered that I would still like to investigate is on a larger scale and in a more nutrient-poor soil, and maybe even an unirrigated soil, what would be the effect of adding clay? So in an environment like a pasture or a cornfield where it's not being irrigated and the plants are undergoing more stress, how would having clay in the soil affect that? My main take-home for using clay to improve nutrient and moisture management is that is worth further investigation. We saw enough of a trend in both crop size, crop yield, and moisture retention that is worth further investigation in different different environments and on different scales.
We added clay to these sandy soils to shift the particle sizes. We wanted to have smaller particles like clays and silts into these soils so that we could reduce the pore sizes. By reducing the pore size, we actually improve the amount of water that the soil can hold and provide to plants. In sandy soils, that water drains through really quickly. By reducing the pore size, we hold that water longer and it provides it to the plants more effectively. I think it's important to mention here that this site, the soils, although they're sandy, already had pretty high organic content, 5%, which is pretty high for Florida soils. Adding the clay didn't have as much of an impact on the water retention as we probably would have seen with lower organic, more natural sandy soils that we would typically find. So we'd be more likely to see significant differences between the treatments if we had started out with lower organic soils. Overall, though, I think we can see that even though we didn't have significant differences, we saw trends by higher soil moisture from the treatments, greater yields with the size of the cabbage that was harvested from the project with the treatments of the clay. And overall, we think that this is a very beneficial and productive result from the study.